Eugene Ofula. I am a senior presenter at the BBC, that is BBC Africa. However, at this time I've actually taken a career break and I'm currently in Cardiff, where I'm doing my master's in international journalism. I'm also founder of Heal the Web, a media initiative that kind of raises awareness on better internet use through content. Joining you from Wales, just like I'd mentioned. Welcome to the 8th edition of the Forum on Internet Freedom in Africa, that is FIFA Africa 2021. And I'm very glad to be your host at this particular time. Just to mention a few things, if you're joining us, especially via Zoom, kindly remember to have your mic off, raise your hand, use the raise your hand feature in case you want to ask a question. I'll be following very closely, and I'll also be looking at the chat box in case you want to ask a question, agree, or sort of disagree with our panelists, which I'll be reviewing what you have to say in terms of feedback. Let me just start by introducing our guest speakers at this time. I'm very excited to actually be interacting with most of them. It's very well balanced, I must say. We start with Simone Tousi, who is joining us from Cameroon. Simone is CIPESA's project officer for Central Africa. She's also a strategic communication specialist as well as consultant. And then we have Rosemary Ajayi joining us from Europe. She is a research lead at the Digital Africa Research Lab. She's quite concerned about, dangerous speech, disinformation, and social media manipulation. So we shall be getting to hear from that about it from that perspective. Then we have Tessa Knight joining us from Cape Town. She is a researcher for the Digital Forensic Research Lab. She focuses on digital propaganda. Her work has actually led to some findings, including Russian influence in Sudan, also internal political influence and social media manipulation in DRC and Uganda. And then finally, she also had findings on government-endorsed disinformation in Eritrea. Really looking forward to hear more about what she discovered on that end. And then we go to Addis Ababa, where we have Abel Wabella, who wears many hats. He is the executive director of Inform Africa, also works for HackCheck and Addis Zeibe. He is very good at, or rather, his area of expertise is fact-checking. I'm actually excited because he verifies media content in English and then translates it into 4 languages. We shall find out how he does that a little bit later. Then we have Morgan Wack, who's joining us from Washington. I think it's about, it's actually 2 a.m. there. Thank you for staying up. I hope you did, catch a power nap or something. He is a PhD graduate at the University of Washington. He is a research assistant currently for the Center for an Informed Public. Thank you, Morgan, for making time for us. Now, I'd like to hand it over to my panelists to just give us their perspective in terms of the opening remarks about why this particular session on disinformation pathways and effects is important to them, and what are some of the things that they hope we shall achieve by the end of this particular discussion, keeping in mind that disinformation is occurs when false information is spread deliberately to deceive. I'll start with you, Tessa.
Wonderful, thank you so much. And good morning / good afternoon to everyone who's joining. So disinformation and digital propaganda is my bread and butter. That is what we focus on at the DFR Lab, Digital Forensic Research Lab. We work to identify, expose, and explain disinformation as it happens. So I primarily focus on this continent, on Africa, and I am really, really excited for this panel because I think that we oftentimes focus on disinformation and looking at disinformation and researching disinformation from a sort of American, European, or Russian perspective, and we forget about this continent quite often. And I'm excited to look at that because I think that we we're interested in Russian, we're interested in American, we're interested in Europe, and I think that we should be talking about this continent. I think we should be talking about Africa. I know that we have people who are maybe in the US here or on this panel. Sorry to single you out, Morgan, but yeah, I'm really passionate about looking at how disinformation occurs, how it is spread, and the effects that it has on democracy in Africa. So I'm excited to talk about that. And yeah, I'm excited to hear from the rest of my panelists.
All right, thank you for that. Let's go to Rosemary now, your opening remarks.
Hi everyone, my name is Rosemary, and like Ian mentioned earlier, I run the Digital Africa Research Lab. The bulk of our work is in Nigeria. We're doing some work in West Africa as well. But beyond, we like to look beyond misinformation, particularly beyond content, right? We're interested in the patterns, we're interested in the tactics, we're interested in who's funding it, and we're interested in the actors. And something that's going to offend a lot of people, well, which usually offends people, is when I say that mainstream media is one of these actors. I think everyone is expecting me to say government. Yes, government is one of the key actors. But in a country like Nigeria, we also have mainstream media and we have journalists. And I hope I can, shed some light on that today. And I pass on to whoever's next. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Rosemary. I think I'll bring in Abel because he actually fact checks the media. Maybe your comment on that, and then your opening remarks, Abel. Sorry, your mic is on mute.
Sorry, yeah. So thank you everyone for having me. So basically, my background is from media, so I know how the content on the internet is evolving. So basically, our fact-checking initiative is become to existence because of the problem we have faced in Ethiopia. So basically, there was no local fact-checking initiative, and there's no any viable efforts to counter disinformation. So we were forced to be part of the global efforts to counter disinformation. So we had a local fact-checking initiative called HackCheck. So basically, we try to focus on the areas of things which are affecting the political stability in Ethiopia. As you know, we are having a civil war, and also there are a number of ethnic conflicts. So the content on social media is feeling what's happening on the ground. So in our case, filtering is a very important job. It saves lives, it stabilizes the country, it supports the democratization process in Ethiopia. So basically, I'm happy because we can speak on continent level. So we will learn a lot from other African countries, and we can share our experience to others. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Abel. And then we go to Simone.
Okay, thank you very much, Ian, for having me here. And thank you everyone who is attending this panel that is very close to my heart, because it points out an issue that is rising up and bringing up too many concerns when it comes to human rights. Yes, I work with CIPESA, as you previously said, and disinformation has been one of the areas of interest of the organization since several years, mainly on research. For instance, CIPESA have joined the other organizations to develop the disinformation tracker that is a tool helping to match laws and practices that relate to disinformation in African countries. And there are also some blogs published on the organization's website that mainly address disinformation issues in states in the face of elections or the management of the COVID-19 pandemics and many other governance issues. And CIPESA also launched Disinformation and Human Rights online training series for human rights defenders, activists, researchers, or journalists, or other from some specific African countries. Now, when it comes to addressing disinformation pathways and effects on democracy, let's say on human rights, political participation, I am particularly interested in that. And if I may focus on some particular countries, let's say like Cameroon or other countries in Central Africa, for example, there is, I think there is pretty much to say, to be said, and to look of. And yes, I think we might see it in the upcoming developments. And yes, that should be quite interesting. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Simone. And then finally, we have Morgan, your opening remarks.
Great, thanks, Ian, and thanks to all the other panelists for going in front of me so that I can get a little bit of extra rest. Yeah, I'm working for the CIP at the moment, the Center for an Informed Public, but my background is actually working mostly in Eastern Africa and in South Africa. And the reason I kind of got into the disinformation and misinformation space is I previously worked in kind of the healthcare sector, and we had to deal with rumors and conspiracies all the time, particularly in HIV prevention programs, trying to reassure people that the authorities in those areas could be trusted, which is obviously something that's very pertinent during the ongoing pandemic at the moment. For the CIP, we worked primarily, as I got called out for by Tessa, on the American side of things. And so we focused on the election. We actually partnered with the DFR lab for a big project called the Election Integrity Partnership, where we looked at misinformation across a number of different social media sites and tracked misinformation stories, tracked how those impact, specific beliefs. We're still putting together a lot of the data on that, but we've had some pretty interesting insights. And what I'm hoping to do, because my background is focused on Sub-Saharan Africa, is to apply a lot of these insights and to see which of them can be helpful, which of the resources, which of the insights can be applied in certain contexts and which can't, and where we can partner with local organizations to really bring out that local expertise, that local context, so that we can assist in fighting disinformation and misinformation all across the globe, and particularly in Sub-Saharan Africa. We're working on a current project right now in South Africa with the upcoming local elections there, and partnering with some fact-checking groups to try to focus on specific stories, to try to analyze how small stories jump between offline and online spaces, which might be something we can talk about later, which I think is very interesting, because we often only focus on the online portions, most likely because it's easier to track sometimes, especially when you can get on those social media sites a little easier. But that's a bit about me, and I'm happy to be here and look forward to some interesting conversation with the rest of these panelists. Thanks, Ian.
Right. Thank you very much, Morgan. Now, if you're listening in, thank you so much for being with us. Remember, you can send us your comments on the chat box. And of course, we are also online on the hashtag that is FIFA Africa, as one word, 21. So you can tweet as much as possible and also get as many people to participate. Let me come back to you, Tessa, because you said something that is quite concerning, that you feel that as a continent, and I'm talking about Africa here, there's kind of a lag when it comes to discussing or addressing issues surrounding disinformation. Why do you say that?
So I think that there are a large number of amazing organizations that are doing a lot of work in this area. I think something that probably frustrates me, that does frustrate me a lot, is I oftentimes will have people message me and say, hey Tessa, I've seen your work. Can you please give me some more information on what Russia is doing in Africa or what China is doing in Africa, and Russian influence operations and Chinese influence operations? And obviously that's very interesting to look at, and that does exist. But I find from the international community, I very rarely have people reaching out to me and asking me about local or internal influence operations, or say a Tunisian PR firm trying to impact elections in other countries. So I think it's probably one of my biggest bugbears is just being asked about what China's doing in Africa. And I will often respond with like maybe a little bit of information and then try to move the conversation to what is happening in the rest of the continent. Because I think that while there are some, as I said, amazing organizations, and there are representatives from those organizations on this panel doing amazing work on this continent, I still don't think that these organizations get the representation that they deserve at an international level. So that's kind of what I was implying there.
All right, thank you for that. And I'll bring in Rosemary, because at the center of kind of trying to address disinformation is the media. Yet in her perspective, she thinks that actually the media is doing the opposite of that, kind of aiding in some sense. Rosemary, maybe you could expound your point.
Thanks, Ian. So first of all, I just want to build upon what Tessa said about the African space, and I agree with her. But also, I think one of the biggest problems is the fact that a lot of people in the UK, people in the US generally think that this all started with Trump and Hillary. And first of all, mis and disinformation has existed in the world long before the internet. And I saw my first troll farm live. I was in a room with the troll farm in 2014 in Nigeria. So the work exists, there are people doing the work, and there are a number of reasons why you might not know us. One, because we have to set up our own organizations to do this work and seek our own funding. We don't work for universities. Our media is also perhaps not equipped to run these stories. They also tend not to have fact-checking units within newsrooms, or have, like the BBC would have, like disinformation journalists. So what you would find in a lot of African countries is dedicated fact-checking organizations, right? And then back to your question about the role of the media. So in Nigeria, the business model for most media organizations enables, this and misinformation. So for instance, if I want my story in the newspaper right now, I just simply have to produce it, send it along with an envelope to the newsroom, and it gets published. I'm paying for this airtime, whether it's TV, whether it's print. You're not going to fact check the content. It's not even, it doesn't concern you, right? Because one, you need the funds. So there's that. But there's also a very close relationship between newsrooms and government. You'll find that a lot of spokespeople government spokespeople have come from the media, right? What this means is that if there's a story that they need to silence, they know who to contact. If there's a story they need to seed, they know who to contact, right? Another thing is also the fact that everyone's looking for likes, right? So you'll see newsrooms they wouldn't necessarily have dedicated social media managers, but they'll have people just monitoring social media to collect stories. They don't check if these stories are true. They just simply copy and paste because, you know, this gets them the engagement. Also ownership of newsrooms, ownership of news organizations, print, and you know, political actors and people in government. So yeah, thank you.
All right. Thank you. You've talked about quite a lot of aspects as to why the media is not kind of giving this the attention, disinformation and misinformation, the attention it deserves. We'll come back to some of the aspects, and maybe I'll have Abel respond to that. But in the meantime, we do have Betty, a team who says, great, interesting profiles of the speakers, and she's in love with the topic. Thank you very much, Betty. Keep those comments coming in. Abel, what do you think about what Rosemary is saying in terms of the role of the media when it comes to fighting disinformation and misinformation? You saw a gap in Ethiopia, for instance, that no one was really talking about this, and you decided to go ahead and start Hack Check. I think he's just dropped from that. Let me just go to Simon on the same question. What's your take about the media's role in fighting disinformation? Especially, you know, you've talked about West Africa. Simone?
Yes, Jan. Talking about the media's role in fighting disinformation, I think the media play a very, very big role in that. The media is the principal, sometimes the principal way, the principal mean through which the government spreads disinformation. We may see that there are many actors of disinformation, many perpetrators, I would say it like that, and among them there are governments, and governments sometimes, as we have seen in Cameroon, uses governmental national medias that are sometimes just one-sided media. In the political perspective, they are one-sided. They are on the government side, and the government uses them to spread disinformation. And the media role becomes very, very intrusive when the government uses other strategies to maybe block access to social media, or to shut down the internet. Now, people don't have access to those second media, and they rely only on the false, I may call it like that, on the false information that is spread through the one-sided governmental media. Now, there is the other part of the media's role. The media can also monitor the disinformation spread. Let's take an example of what happens with the Wagner groups in Cameroon during the campaign, the election campaign in October 2018. Yes, Facebook reportedly found many social media accounts, many Facebook accounts that were reported to be linked to the Wagner group, and after survey and other investigations, Facebook dismantled all those fake accounts. So the media has a two-sided role. The media can help spread disinformation very largely, and the media can also help limit the spread of that disinformation, if it is well monitored, if it is well chosen, if it is well used. It depends on the type of the media. It depends of yes, it depends mainly on the type of the media and the way how it is used and people that are managing that media. So that is what I think about it, the media's role in the face of disinformation.
All right, thank you, Simone. And Morgan, let me bring you in, because we've seen in instances where the media is playing a crucial role, in being accountable and kind of holding leaders to account and doing further investigations into different aspects. But then just a simple word or comment from someone like, Donald Trump saying fake news CNN, and suddenly everything CNN, for instance, was doing at this point is kind of watered down. What do you think about such instances?
Yeah, I think it'd be great to hear thoughts from someone who's worked in the media. Maybe if we can get Abel back on here in a second. But from the U.S. perspective, I think Rosemary brought up a great point. I do think, and Simone as well, about the fracturing of the online kind of media environment. Right, we used to have kind of centralized mass media markets, and the rise of social media has really broken that up in a lot of ways and kind of distributed that monopoly to a much larger, broader voice. And that can be great in some ways, where we're hearing people that we wouldn't have otherwise heard of, but it also leaves the system vulnerable. And not only that, but it also doesn't allow it. This is what Rosemary was getting at before, is that it leaves less funding for these entities that still exist to kind of fact check and to play the role as arbiters of the truth, even though that's still what they're expected to do, but with less funds and with fewer incentives to do so. And we've done a lot of work on tracking fact checks during the 2020 US election. And no matter what the story, no matter how untrue, the fact checks never get as much likes and retweets as the original piece of misinformation. It just doesn't sell. And so the incentive is just not there to really promote these types of fact checking. And so that's why it would be great to hear from Abel about how he's kind of able, how we can sustain or support these types of fact-checking organizations that are really doing this crucial work that just doesn't allow, the incentives just don't promote this within these mass media organizations the way they used to.
Right. Maybe Tessa, just a quick comment on the media's role in fighting disinformation. Then we can go to Abel. I think his connection is now stable, so that he can wrap that up for us.
Sure. So, I mean, having previously worked as a journalist, I will say, to expand on what Morgan said, on this continent and around the world, the industry is sort of struggling with funding. A lot of journalists have lost their jobs. And from a newsroom perspective, sometimes, one will focus on, say, reporting what's happening with the COVID-19 pandemic, or if you're in a conflict zone, it's more important to report on that than it might be, or it is interpreted to be more important to report on hospitals that are struggling, or whether conflict has expanded to a different region, because that's happening right now and it's quite tangible. And I think people are very focused on that like tangible aspect, where if we look at what's happening online, people might not necessarily be as interested because internet penetration might not be that great, or there might not necessarily be a large number of people online. And then we also have to look at the fact, as Simone mentioned, that there are also a number of countries that don't have free and independent media. Say Eritrea, for example, you don't have free and independent media there. So you're obviously only going to get a one-sided perspective, and it is going to be from the government. And then it's quite difficult to get information that isn't one-sided back into that country, that the people of Eritrea, and I'm using Eritrea as an example because I'm looking at it now, but with the internet penetration there and with the government control, it's really difficult to get a fact check back into that country. So people will be consuming that one-sided narrative. So I think, while Rosemary's point that media can definitely be can and are definitely perpetrators of spreading disinformation. We also just have to acknowledge the squeeze on the industry financially, and then also the fact that there are oftentimes things that people will consider more important, you know, as I said,
Okay.
people dying in hospitals, dying in conflict.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Tessa. Abel, are you there? Maybe you can tell us in terms of, because what I'm hearing from the rest of the panel is that there's need for accountability. Like the media also needs to be held accountable so that they, in some sense, don't spread disinformation. There's also need for funding. There's even perhaps need for training journalists on how to package news items or fact checks in a way that the audiences can relate. You're doing this in some sense, kind of doing fact checking, but how else can the media actually be held accountable, and how else can they take disinformation with the seriousness it deserves? Abel.
Okay, thank you. Sorry for the trouble because of my internet connection. So basically, the media plays both roles, the positive and the negative role. It depends on its business model. So in a country like Ethiopia, most of the media organizations are getting funded from governments. So basically they speak what the government wants to say. So on that case, they are disseminating false information, one-sided narrative. So because of that, they are not on this battle. So basically, most of the media organizations are not strong enough. So some of them want to sensationalize their content and getting high traffic on YouTube and in other platforms. So in that case, they also play the negative role. But some of the media who tries to do professional job and to stay independent, they are working to counter disinformation. So basically, our initiative started in the newsroom as a desk. So we just started to debunk false information circulated on social media and mainstream media. But later we understand that the countering disinformation is not only fact-checking, it needs some strategic intervention, understanding the trends. It must be supported by researchers, and also we have to train journalists because some of the contents are not deliberate, they are misinformation. So we have to train some of the journalists to understand the basics. They make the basic mistakes they do when they prepare stories. So on that case, they will understand the basics and they can make the correction by themselves. But in general, the media, when it has a better understanding about the trends of disinformation and the damage they are making because of that, they will be a good partner for fighting disinformation and doing fact-checking.
Ian, I just wanted to say to give this a positive spin, because we're obviously very worried about journalists not being able to cover this. The DFR Lab does do a lot of trainings on how to track disinformation, and I will say there has been a massive amount of interest from this continent. So hopefully that'll have some sort of impact, and we will be able to get more journalists doing this kind of work. So just to maybe end on a positive note.
All right, thank you for that, Tessa. Let's now move on to, I'd like us to talk about disinformation and its role in democracies. But before we do that, remember you can talk to us on the chat box. Just let us know what you think about the discussions that we are having right now. We're not actually talking at you. We'd like to really hear what you have to think about this particular discussion. And, from a political class, disinformation looks like an excellent tool, especially during campaigns or kind of to tarnish the opponent's name. Let me bring in Rosemary, because one of the ways this actually happens is through social media manipulation. What is the effect of this, and how can we let our leaders know that they are actually trading on very dangerous grounds, so to say? Rosemary.
Hi again. Interesting question. So, I mean, Tessa can also speak to this as well. But what we're seeing in Nigeria and perhaps Ghana would be, when it comes to election season, you'll find like little armies of influencers, commercial influencers. In Nigeria, we refer to them as influencer after the flu, because their goal is to make content trend. They'll receive a brief from a client, from a political client, and they'll basically come to a platform like Twitter and publish the hashtag, publish content, and make it trend, right? So they use various tactics to make it trend, and some of these tactics, well, most of these tactics sort of violate Twitter's rules. So for instance, they'll use hacked verified accounts, they'll use compromised verified accounts, they'll use fake celebrity accounts, they'll have an army of fake accounts, and they're basically putting out this content, sometimes with fake giveaways, because they know that these are the sorts of motivations to get people to engage with the content and, you know, amplify it. And then they'll delete these tweets, right? So if you're a researcher, there's no evidence. Sometimes I've spoken to Twitter about it. They'll tell me they can't see it, but I've got the screenshots. And one of the problems with this is that they make it so that there's a narrative that is seeded on Twitter, which through the trending topics enters mainstream Nigeria Twitter. And people then begin to talk about it. The media might then pick up stories from this. It might go to Facebook, it might go to WhatsApp, I mean the screenshots, and it's spread in that manner. That's, you know, what I would describe as the social media manipulation in this case. But what they're doing is giving a false sense of popularity to this content, right? By the time it goes from this fake giveaway, a hashtag attached to a fake giveaway, to the newspaper, they've used us on social media and the platform to do this job of, you know, taking a non-story and making it a key topic of the day, right? Sometimes they try to seed candidates as well. So, you know, perhaps nobody was talking about a particular candidate for office. They'll seed his name or her name. And I mean, I think what's important to note is just that it's harmful in the sense that people don't know it's paid for. People don't know it's manipulated as well. If you do, then I guess maybe you'd have your guard up, then perhaps the media won't cover it. But it's a very powerful way of, you know, seeding content, seeding a narrative, whether it's, you know, policy, whether it's, you know, political manifesto. And it's a really powerful way of seeding these narratives into, you know, people's consciousness.
And Rosemary, this is why the political class are very keen on actively using disinformation. What do you think about that?
Sorry, could you repeat your question, please?
It's more of a comment. I'm just saying that, you know, this is why the political class are very keen on using disinformation every other election cycle. How can we address that?
Well, I mean, like I said at the start, this is not limited to social media. Before the internet, we would, well, not we, stories or narratives would be seeded in the marketplace and spread via that way, or they would be seeded in the motor park, where you've got, you've got a motor park, which is a hub, a transport hub, where you've got cars going across the country. You would seed it there and have it spread. I really, I'm not sure what the solution is. I think we need a multi-stakeholder approach. I think we need a multidisciplinary approach as well. I think it's important to have, digital literacy, but that alone doesn't work. Fact checking on its own, it doesn't work. Like Morgan said, dis and misinformation content is sexy. Fact checked content isn't as sexy. It never goes viral, right? The platforms have to play a role. The media has to play a role.
All right. A multi-sectoral approach. Let me bring in Simone, because this is also something that is of concern to her when it comes to disinformation during elections. And you had talked about looking at this from a West African approach. But before you just respond to that, Simone, I can see Nema has a comment here. She says, given that disinformation thrives on one, sensationalism, driving engagement, capitalism, and ad-driven media platforms, aside from fact-checking initiatives, what do you see working to tackle disinformation on the continent currently? Also, are there any automated systems for real-time fact-checking and counter-narratives? We'll come back to that, Nema. Simone, maybe your take on what we're currently discussing.
Yes, sorry, Ian, I missed your question.
No, we're currently just talking about, the political class relying on disinformation as a tool during the election period, and we're looking at kind of the effects. And one of the questions that I had thrown to Rosemary is, how do we address this? How do we make this stop?
Yes, in order to address it or to make it stop, we need to first find a way to really identify how it comes, by whom it is done. Before we can easily maybe find ways to counter it. For instance, when you have I will take another example in Cameroon again. When you have a government or people or a group of people providing information with the aim to neutralize protest movements on the street to help one candidate's electoral campaign, or designated or clearly identifiable media that disseminate news just with the aim to whitewash the state's reputation, the power in place's reputation through fake news, just to make it just to show the president as a good person, as the person that is meant to stay there. When you see all those things, and or all the fake news that is clearly targeting one opposition party, for example, the media, all that goes through the media. We know sometimes people who are doing it because they can be clearly identifiable. Sometimes we don't know them. We just see some media. We don't know who has created it. We just see what they are doing. And they do all that through the media. The media is the main way to spread disinformation. Now, media holders, they know their work. They are there to play a role. They either serve the government or the citizen or both. And now, when we know that, we need to focus on people that can actually, because if we focus on things, on facts, it will be a little bit difficult to address it or to make a change somewhere or to instigate change. We may focus on people that are head or that are leading those or those platforms, media or others, or people that are leading strategies. If it's a government strategy, or if it's a private sector that is partnering with, if it's a private company that is partnering with the government to manipulate information. We should focus on people that are leading these. We should name. We can be able. We shall be able to name people or instances that are doing that in order to carry out maybe advocacy through facts, through notable facts that we identify, like the occurrences that I cited, for instance, in order to address it to them and find ways to counter future occurrences, or work together with them, and using all the strategies that we can use. We know that we have advocacy, but we can still have many other approaches. You spoke about training journalists. That is one of the things we can do, training journalists. But I say again, journalists as media actors, they know what they have to do. So if they spread disinformation instead of doing otherwise, that is the choice. It's no more, they are not manipulated, that is a choice. So we need to work together with those people in order to try to tackle this. I don't know if I responded to your question, to your main concern, but I also want to respond to one part of Nima's question, the last one.
Okay.
She said, are there any automated system for real-time fact-checking and counter-narratives? That is what I'm not sure of. I'm not sure we already have automated systems to do that. But I'm sure we have organizations that timely work on that. They are working on fact-checking. We have many. We even have some in Africa. We have some in African countries, country-based organizations that work on fact-checking, but real-time fact-checking. I'm not sure I'm not sure. I can't say it's not possible. I'm not sure we already have automated system for that. But organizations, yes, they are there. They are working hardly to address all that. So that's it.
Okay.
Thank you, Jan.
Thank you, Simone. Let me bring in Abel, because again, the media right at the center of this, and it sort of seems like the buck stops with the media. Basically, what also Simone is saying, we are the ones who, and I say we because I'm a journalist, we kind of give these platforms to our political class to say whatever they want to say, to go free without being held accountable. And we know that this has long-lasting effects when it comes to democracies and our elections, and who at the end of the day the public decides to choose. Abel.
Yeah, basically the case of Ethiopia is a good example for what's happening, how different political actors use disinformation as a tool to advance their agenda. So in the past, we used to have very strong authoritarian governments. It was very skillful on silencing dissenting voices. So there was no any problem at that time. So, but different political groups understand the power of the social media on challenging that regime. So that regime was forced to do political reform in 2018. Then after that, after we had a political reform, the people who wished to, they do understand the power of social media, so they still using the platforms to advance their agendas. So because of that, we couldn't manage to deliver the promise of political reform. So everyone was using different techniques of disinformation to destabilize the country. We used to have so many ethnic conflicts throughout the country. So most of the time when we do fact checking, we find contents which were downloaded from different parts of the world to see. Most of the people who claim that they represent a certain ethnic groups, they use all the horrible contents across the world to advance their agenda. So that makes the democratization process in Ethiopia difficult, and people who are in power, who contend to be dominant in the political power, were not able to reach to a consensus. So that's why we are having a war in the northern Ethiopia. So after having the war, in the case of humanitarian support, both groups are claiming that they are producing false contents about the situation of the humanitarian crisis in the north. So the people are suffering because of that. Now again, some people are trying to negotiate, to create some sort of negotiation between both groups, but still the conversation about the negotiation is also affected by the disinformation. And also for the peace building process is still bringing more radical thoughts and radical expressions and the hateful contents that is now becoming the situation in our country difficult. So it's very crucial to counter disinformation, to have a proper democratization process, and also not only for election, but the whole process, the whole conversation on politics and other issues should be supported by the fact-checking activities. And also we have to do more strategic things like media literacy and other things to support the peaceful and healthy conversation among different actors. So when we give platforms for the political actors, we have to be very crucial. For example, we had a very famous YouTube shows in our media outlets. So politicians who came to discuss the issues, they are not allowed to speak whatever they want, because our newsroom is much more conscious about the fact checking. So they will be asked to say numbers, and they will be forced to state only the facts. So we are not helping them to disseminate their false information. We're just trying to give a perspective for the audience. So when newsrooms becomes more conscious about what they do, they will support the democratization process as a whole.
All right, thank you, Abel, for that. I can see Betty's question in regards to COVID-19 and disinformation. That's the second part of our discussion, Betty. So I'll come back to that question. Neema, thank you so much for sharing the verification tool that is available in India via WhatsApp. So if you'd like, you can actually check the link by Neema. I want to go to Tessa now and then Morgan. And Tessa, you had some interesting findings. I really don't know, actually, just going by your profile in regards to internal political interference and social media manipulation in DRC. I'm pretty curious about what that was about.
Okay, cool. That's fantastic, because I think that also answers your question around politicians using social media. So, I mean, to emphasize what everybody else has said, the saying that a lie travels halfway around the world before the truth has even put its shoes on happened before the internet, before social media came about. And I think that's very much still true. And misinformation, disinformation, as was said, is very sexy. I mean, to comment quickly on Nima's question, it's really difficult to do real-time fact-checking because fact-checking does take some time and you need to put some effort into it. Otherwise, you might potentially accidentally put out misinformation yourself. So with my DRC investigation, it was really, really interesting because it kind of showed how the lie travels around the world. I actually came across it because Bill Gates was trending in South Africa, and I couldn't figure out why this group of high-profile, anonymous South African influencers who do often spread disinformation were sharing this screenshot of what looked to be this disinformation that it was written in pretty inaccurate English. So I thought that, oh, okay, this has probably been translated from a different language. And what I was able to do was I was able to trace it back. And this screenshot was actually a translation of a post that had originally been posted by a Facebook page in DR Congo. And it was COVID-19 disinformation. And I looked into those pages more, and what I found was it was a network of pages, and what they had done is they had very, very rapidly gained followers by posting political and COVID-19 disinformation. And they were impersonating newsrooms, they were impersonating pretty influential figures in DR Congo or controversial figures, and they were rapidly putting out this disinformation about the pandemic and about certain politicians. And then, interestingly enough, because I was monitoring them, I noticed that what they'd done after a few weeks, once they'd racked up like tens of thousands of followers, is they removed all of their previous content and they suddenly started promoting this single politician. And a relatively minor politician, not someone who was super influential, like a vice president or a minister or something like that. And the largest group, the group that had the most followers, then completely changed tact and it changed its name, and it turned into the Facebook page representing this politician's political party. So it had a huge number of followers from impersonating an influential and controversial figure. And it had a huge number of followers from spreading COVID-19 disinfo and political disinfo. And suddenly content about this politician was reaching a much wider audience, people that wouldn't necessarily have heard about him. And interestingly enough, this entire operation was being run by a group of young men from Kinshasa University. And we were able to sort of unfold it, and it was interesting because what had originally happened, the reason that I came across it, because I wasn't monitoring the DRC, it's pretty morbid, but I usually tell people that I follow conflict and elections because that's where one finds a lot of disinformation. And that wasn't necessarily happening in the DRC at that time. So I thought this entire situation was very, very interesting because it had traveled from this post from one of those pages that got a huge amount of engagement. These clickbait websites that claimed to be news organizations had picked up on it, had republished it, auto-translated it into English. It had been shared by a US politician, and then it had been picked up by these influencers in South Africa. And then with this anti-Bill Gates narrative that was being spread on social media at the time, our President Cyril Ramaphosa, put out a tweet from an interview with Bill Gates by Trevor Noah. And as a result, all of this anti-Bill Gates narrative, we actually had a media story that was published in by one of our largest media houses, and they had to retract that story because it was inaccurate, and they had to put out a retraction, and they had to publicly apologize to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And then they did a fact check of the story and contacted me, and we traced it all back and explained how it got to this. But I thought it was such a fantastic example of how something traveled from Facebook to, these clickbait websites in Guinea, in France, to the US, to South Africa, and made it from Facebook in French to English on Twitter, and then suddenly into South African media. So it's an interesting example of how disinformation can mutate so drastically, and two, how politicians can impersonate, can use inauthentic accounts to rack up followers and reach a much wider audience. So I think I've hopefully answered that question. I know that was a bit of a long example, but I just think it's so fantastic, and it shows how even disinformation that completely does not relate to the South African political environment, it just mutates and spreads, and suddenly it's completely different, and it's made its way into South African media.
Yeah, thank you, Tessa. I think that was a good example that, of course, this is not just a continental issue. It's just not an African issue, but it says it's a global issue. Morgan, I'd like you to finish up for us on this discussion. You're responding to two things. First, you talked about some of the work you're doing in local Southern Africa elections to try and sort of stop disinformation. Maybe you can tell us a bit about that, and then you can also respond to Nema's first part of the question, where she's asking, aside from fact-checking initiatives, what do you see working to tackle disinformation on the continent currently? So is it an issue of policy? Morgan?
Sure, yeah, great question. And thanks, Nemo, for the question. We're getting a lot out of it, so we appreciate that. Yeah, I think I'm going to bring up one thing here that we haven't really touched on, that perhaps we will when we talk a bit about COVID-19, but that's just the role that trust plays between individuals and the government, and individuals and media institutions, and individuals and other individuals in their communities. And I think one of the ways that I've seen short-term success, to get at Nima's question, is to use trusted individuals to present the message. A lot of times the problem is we focus on the government promoting, fact checks, or the government participating in fact checks, which is of course great if they can get out the word. They have lots of channels that individual people don't, and they have resources that people don't. But it's often, in many places, that the government is one of the least trusted actors in the country in many, many contexts. And specifically, politicians are often very untrusted. So we do need individuals who are trusted in these communities to be able to promote positive messaging. And so when I used to work in kind of HIV prevention work in South Africa, a lot of times our biggest successes in stopping rumors were to use local leaders, or to use local celebrities, even, who would participate in things and create songs that had to do with, true amounts of information to promote positive news around sources. Unfortunately, these are relatively short-term, fixes. They don't solve the underlying issues of misinformation, but I do think they have a strong effect on countering specific narratives. Another one that I've seen work fairly well in South Africa is Africa Check's use. What they do is they basically not only fact check things, but they have the reach to reach out specifically to politicians themselves. As we've mentioned here, politicians with Facebook accounts, politicians with WhatsApp accounts can have a very large audience. And so what Africa Check does in certain circumstances is reaches out to them, not publicly, but privately, and says, you might want to take that down. We think that might be misinformation. And the politicians will be like, oh, yeah, you're not calling me out. I can take this down without it being a big thing. And a lot of times you can cut it off before it even becomes a large issue. So these are some of the minor things you can do to get at some of these, things that aren't just fact checks, that I think have been fairly effective. Sorry, can you remind me of the second part of the question, Ian? I think
you were to give us a quick, example or update on what you're doing in Southern Africa to kind of help during the local elections.
Absolutely. So what we're doing is we're trying to implement a very similar system to what we did in the US election. And so what we did is we kind of incorporated a group of students that we trained to track throughout, gave them specific subject expertise. So a specific student might have a specific state or a specific topic in mind that they are going to study and track across different platforms, Facebook, Parler, TikTok, all these different things, so that we can cover a lot of bases. And then you give them these content expertise, and they are working in teams to spot misinformation. And the reason I think this is important is because a lot of research, I think Simone was getting at this earlier, a lot of research that we have just doesn't adequately address the full picture. We can focus on specific narratives, but it's usually the bigger narratives that blow up. And we're not necessarily seeing the misinformation pieces that never even reach fact check stage, right? The ones that don't take off. And since we don't have these counterfactuals, it's very difficult for us to get a sense of what it is that separates one successful in the sense that it became viral versus another piece of misinformation that falls off. And so in South Africa, what we're trying to do is we're collecting currently ongoing, millions of tweets from everything from mentions of specific parties to a lot of stuff around the Electoral Commission, which monitors kind of safety and electoral stability in South Africa. And we'll go through and partner with local organizations in South Africa to get fact checks so we can find out which of these stories within the larger data set are pieces of misinformation. And we think this is a great way of combining kind of local expertise with large scale, large N analysis to give us a large database for these types of things that we can use to not only study and hopefully prevent some things in the short term around this election, but also in the long term to provide researchers and organizations with more knowledge of what actually is the influence of these operations, what actually is the effect of different types of misinformation.
All right, thank you very much, Morgan, for that. Now we have actually 19 minutes, sadly, time is really going by. And I'd like us to move to our second and final part of just discussing the impact of disinformation on COVID-19 and to the larger effect that is health systems. Most of the things that we're going to be talking about right now, we either have discussed them in a way, but now we're looking at it from a health perspective. And that's why I'm bringing in Betty's question. She says disinformation is currently taking the lead in the world, especially during the this COVID-19 pandemic. There's a lot of misinformation about COVID-19 vaccines, and the responsible authorities have failed to come out and disclose the right information to the citizens. We need to fight disinformation. Duty bearers should come out and provide the right information. Misinformation is hindering citizens from taking COVID-19 vaccine. This reminds me of a story that we covered a couple of months ago. TikTok had a challenge called Vaccine Challenge, and basically you're supposed to record yourself pretending you're seated by like with your family, and then suddenly you start convulsing. And then the hashtag was, vaccine challenge. I'm convulsing because I took the vaccine. Whereas many people found this quite funny, I did find it interesting that a number of people were saying this is exactly why I'm not taking the vaccine. And Rosemary, this might not be necessarily your area of expertise when it comes to disinformation and health systems, but let's talk about it from a social media perspective. We are seeing how especially young people are really consuming whatever they're coming across, be it a simple challenge or a meme that is aimed at creating a source of entertainment. Some take it as gospel truth. Rosemary.
What was your question? You didn't. There was no question there.
Sorry, there wasn't a question. I would just like your reaction in regards to the role social media plays when it comes to situations like the COVID-19 pandemic, to either help solve the problem or actually make it worse.
Okay, thanks. So again, like everything else we've said, social media is really neither good nor bad, right? There are people who are using these platforms, and social media has been a very powerful tool in Nigeria, well, particularly Twitter before the ban, with regard to providing official information from the NCDC, right? And they also use other platforms, like there's a Telegram channel, there's WhatsApp, and not just for the NDC, they have a partnership with WhatsApp, where you've got, bots addressing questions that you send into the WHO, the NCDC in Nigeria, and other health organizations. But I think one of the biggest challenges that you'll find with social media, right, is that, and social media and the COVID situation is, for a long time, we didn't know what was right information. So going back to Betty's question, what is right information about COVID? There's conflicting information from different countries, like, should you wear masks? Should you not wear masks? In the beginning, we were told a lot of conflicting, we were given a lot of conflicting information, right? And when you don't trust the medical authorities, you will look to others within society. And these could be journalists, these could be people you trust, these could be celebrities, these could be influencers, these could be doctors and nurses. And we're finding that some doctors and nurses are actually anti the COVID vaccine. So who do you actually trust? But yeah, those would be my thoughts. I think social media can be very powerful. I don't want, like Tessa mentioned earlier, let's not make this all, let's have some positivity here today. Social media can be very useful, but yeah.
All right, thank you, Rosemary. Let me bring in Simone, because Simone, do you think that the COVID-19 period has been very interesting, because we are also seeing a situation where if we go to the beginning, not even our health experts kind of understood what they were dealing with, and there was a lot of panic, at the same time need for a quick response. And we have seen that in the absence of information, actually misinformation thrives. Simone.
Yes, Jan, of course, in the absence of true and reliable information, disinformation thrives. It has shown to be actually thriving in many countries. There have been many lies on the nature of the pandemic itself, and many lies on the vaccine, and also many lies on the way how it should be prevented, like Rosemary just said, wearing mask or not, and many other lies on the way how governments are managing the pandemic. So there is information that is true, and the social media sometimes their power to spread that misinformation, that disinformation on pandemic is I think they really used the panic. They really used the fact that people were in panic. They didn't know how to do what to do. The social media really served on that to be very, very I would say very powerful on spreading false information, because people were they were afraid. Now, well, if we say the social media fueled disinformation, we can also say it was the best way to disseminate true information. The only problem there is that true information is not always available at time. So there is a work to be done with regard to such a crisis, to the management of crisis, and how the information spreads on social networks. There is work to be done on how officials, I mean, how people that that detain true information, how they should actually disseminate it. So if we have true information that is being spread at the same let's say at the same speed as for false information, maybe there should be some reduction. And on the other hand, spreading true information, and on the other hand, reducing the spread of false information. That is the work of stakeholders like us. That is the work of journalists. That is the work of the civil society. That is the work of those working on fact checking and spreading the true information at times. So we need timely information. We need timely alerts that this or that information is rather false. So we need all those things. So people should work together to tackle this in that way. That is what I think. There are many other things to be done, but for now, I think social media, just to counter that widespread of social media, that is what can be one of the things that can be done.
All right, thank you, Simone. Abel has just shared a report he did back in July 2021 titled Equitable Vaccine Distribution and Vaccine Hesitancy from Ethiopia. So Abel, I'll take your final word on this particular discussion. So let me go to Tessa Morgan, and then I come back to you. So Tessa, I keep saying that the COVID-19 period has been very interesting, because at first there was hardly any information about this virus that we were dealing with, and then later on we had so much information that was very confusing, that the WHO talked about an infodemic. What do you think of this particular period, and what are some of the maybe cases of this mis and disinformation that you have dealt with in South Africa?
I think it's important to note that a lot of people exist in echo chambers on social media. So someone who is anti-vaccines, or someone who believes in traditional remedies, is unlikely to engage with content that doesn't support their agenda. You know, we oftentimes exist in echo chambers in real life as well. But I find in social media, often we're following people that support our narrative. So I think, one, it can be difficult to get the fact-checked information to the people that, you know, quote unquote, need it, to the people who are very vehemently anti the vaccine, because they're likely not engaging with that content. They're more than likely, you know, engaging with the content, as you said, the TikTok content of people claiming to have very negative reactions to the vaccine. As a result of my work, I not engage with, but I monitor people from a wide variety of walks of life. So I'm in the anti-vax circles because I have to be. And yeah, I've noticed, unsurprisingly, that they're not sharing content saying that the vaccine does, say, for example, often prevent people who, or often help people who do then still catch COVID recover faster. Instead, they'll be sharing content saying that someone who had the vaccine still got COVID, and therefore the vaccine is pointless. Yeah, I mean, with my work, relating to COVID, I actually did a piece on the pandemic before it was called an infodemic, before it was labeled a pandemic, before we even really had any information on it, way back in, I want to say probably like March, April. So I'm going to try and dredge up content from that report. But I remember some of the first things that people did, people who were very vehement QAnon supporters, they twisted the narrative and said, hey, this is, China did this on purpose. They let it loose at the World Military Games that were hosted in Wuhan. This fit their narrative, their anti-China narrative. So I think that's happened from the very, very beginning. That continues to happen, even though we do have more information. And yeah, as Rosemary mentioned, it's can be incredibly difficult, and I think we have to be sympathetic to the fact that it can be incredibly difficult to try and figure out what is and isn't true when there is so much information, and that information changes very, very rapidly. You know, we go from not having a vaccine to having a vaccine to finding out that all of this new information, and we have to be sympathetic to the fact that people do struggle to figure out what is and isn't true when you're just being bombarded with a lot of content. And social media can be beneficial, and social media can be, as traditional media can be, as any sort of media can be, it can be used to spread false information about what's happening.
All right, thank you, Tessa. Morgan, over to you. We have seen in the US, I think fair to say almost more than anywhere else in the world, some very strong anti-vaxxers campaigns and persons speaking about the COVID-19 vaccine. What kind of effect has this had generally in terms of government's response?
Yeah, first off, before I forget, I'm going to drop the name of two colleagues of mine at the Center for Informed Public, which have done some great work on COVID in particular and kind of vaccine hesitancy in the US, if anyone is interested. Yeah, I think, as we were saying earlier in the conversation, you know, every context is different, right? If we're not going to paint a broad brush of all of sub-Saharan Africa, we want specifically what is the media environment, what is the local environment like in Tanzania versus Kenya. It's the same with the US. The US has a very kind of particular kind of learned history where it's very strong on kind of the libertarian side of things, where there's a very strong sense in many populations about personal liberties and personal freedoms, which certainly plays a role. I just want to point out a couple other things that have made the vaccine hesitancy, not just for COVID, but in particular during this pandemic, very kind of malicious, is the uncertainty, which we haven't really commented on too much. I think uncertainty is something that we kind of underplay, but I think it's very specifically evident in the case of vaccines, because vaccines are a preventative treatment. We don't have evidence that they work in our particular lives. If you take the vaccine and you don't get sick, it's very easy to say, well, it was just a sham or it was some sort of gimmick. Whereas, traditional medicine, you're sick to begin with, you take it and you get better, you have very obvious direct evidence. And so we're working from a very tough position. And then with something like a pandemic where something's constantly evolving, we're having to work in this space where we don't actually have solidified facts. New variants come in, we're dealing with difficult things. And so when this all comes together and you're in an environment where the US is incredibly polarized at the moment, people will stick to their sides. Like Tessa said, they're in their echo chambers. And once you have a particularly trusted source and they say, well, do your own research, or, don't necessarily trust the CDC. Look at this one thing they said that turned out to be wrong. They said not to wear masks in the beginning. And we know how that turned out. It's very difficult to win people back. As anyone here can attest who's ever been in a relationship, I'm sure it's much easier to destroy trust than it is to win trust back. And so I think we're all just in a very difficult situation. In the US in particular, the polarized political environment and the politicization of the pandemic has made it exceptionally difficult to deal with that.
All right, thank you, Morgan. Let me go to Abel now. And Abel, maybe you can tell us a bit more of the findings that you got in your report, that is the equitable vaccine distribution and vaccine hesitancy from Ethiopia. And then this will also be your final word for the larger discussion in regards to disinformation pathways and effects. We are actually out of time, so I'm beginning to take final comments now. Abel.
Okay. It's good to speak after Morgan. He has been discussing about the society in the US. So according to the research I have posted in the chat box, the main source, as Rosemary pointed out earlier, the main source of disinformation related to vaccine hesitancy is health professionals. So they have access to the US media websites, so they get fresh news updates about which vaccine is doing better. For example, there was some conversation about the failures of AstraZeneca and some other issues. So most of the time, the health professionals are getting that information. So they didn't do the analysis because they are learned in health profession, but they are not media literate. So they don't understand the impact of the information they are circulating. So most people when we ask them about why they don't want to go to the health center to get the vaccine, they told us they know somebody else in the social media who is a doctor or health professional who has posted something related to the failures. So basically, it is the health professionals themselves are the main source of the disinformation. So basically, it's good to teach everyone. We think that media literacy is for people who didn't go to school or people who doesn't understand, but the whole society as a whole, because the tools and the issues are they are fast changing. It's very dynamic. So the people we think that they are most informed should learn a lot about what's in the information, what is the impact of the information they are circulating on social media. So that's the main finding we have got. So because of the health professionals are hesitant, the public follows that direction.
All right. I think Abel's connection has dropped, unfortunately, but he had actually, I feel like, said the most of what he might have wanted to. Let me take final comments now from Rosemary, and then we go to Simone, Tessa, and then Morgan. So Rosemary, you can just summarize anything in regards to our main discussion, and that's disinformation pathways and the effects, and maybe how you hope that forums like these by CPESA and our own initiatives can actually address misinformation and disinformation around the continent.
Thanks. So to round up, I would say that it's important for us to understand that this is not just a social media problem. That's one. But I think within the ecosystem of interventions, I feel there's a stronger need for us to work together. You know, there are skills that there are skills that overlap, and then there are also gaps, and we need to figure out a way to block these gaps, right? It's also important to understand that we need to figure out a way to make fact checks sexy. You know, we need to make them go viral. We need to learn from the bad actors and use these tactics as well, adopt or appropriate these tactics. It's also important to understand, you know, the motivations behind this content, behind these activities. Is it financial? Is it political? Is it religious? Yeah, and I think in terms of the continent, it's great to see, you know, collaborations, cross-country collaborations happening on the South African elections. It would be great to see a lot more of those, because some of these tactics do take place in different countries. There's a lot that I learned from Tessa. We've seen similar in Kenya. It would be great to see, you know, forums like this, you know, lead to more collaborations among people within the continent. And I will end there. Also, I don't, can I just say that I don't hate the media. I don't think the media are the only bad actors, right? Yeah.
Thank you for that disclaimer, Rosemary. Let's go to Simone now. Simone, your final comment.
Okay, Jan. Thanks. From our preliminary work on that, I think the overall key trend is, one of the overall key trends is that the laws that have been used, or the decisions taken by the states to tackle disinformation, to tackle fake news, are being either rather against the freedom of expression. So disinformation is kind of, many people have said that, a new sexy that helps the government's digital repression. So there is an urgent need for stakeholders to work on disinformation policies and laws, and urgently engage governments to repeal these existing harmful law provisions in order to act new frameworks that respect democracy principles and human rights standards. So that would be my final words. Thank
All
you.
right. Simone. Tessa, then Morgan.
I think to comment on disinformation pathways and effects, I think we've dealt with the fact that disinformation pathways are not just on social media. They have existed since, I would say, the beginning of politics and ruling. Disinformation has become potentially easier as a result of social media, but it's certainly not solely a social media problem. And then effects, well, disinformation impacts democracy. It doesn't always, and I think sometimes we can overplay the impact that it does have, but it certainly can have a massive impact on democracy. And as we've seen with COVID-19, it can have a massive impact on health and on whether or not people take a life-saving vaccine. With regards panels like this, I think it's fantastic, and I absolutely think that we should have more people from this continent who engage with one another, and I think that we need more people from this continent who are doing this kind of work, which is why I absolutely love doing trainings and getting more journalists involved. But yeah, I think ultimately these kind of panels are fantastic because we need to listen to people from this continent, talk about this continent, because we are the ones that experience disinformation. You know, in South Africa, living in Cape Town, I am exposed to political disinformation at the moment, a huge amount. You know, you hear it like in the shopping center because we have elections coming up. So I love the fact that Morgan is working with local organizations, because I think it's super important that we do focus around elections. We do focus on combating disinformation around elections, but also in everyday times. I think one of the issues, and I won't go too much longer because I'm aware that we're over time. I think one of the issues, and something that I really hope that we're able to work on in the future, is that this kind of work is often very reactive. Fact checking and doing the work that I do on disinformation, we often do it, you know, it's reactive. It happens after the misinformation has been put out. It happens after the disinformation has been put out. I think that has quite a significant impact on consumption. So hopefully we will be able to maybe not necessarily have, you know, real-time fact checking for, you know, certain events, but be able to do it a lot more quickly, or pick it up before it becomes a serious problem. Awesome, and thank you very much for having us.
Thank you, Tessa. Morgan, you have our final word. I think it's almost 4 a.m. your time. We need to either let you sleep or start your day. I don't know.
Well, we'll find out after this, I suppose. But no, I appreciate you hosting, Ian, and thanks everyone for coming. This is a great panel. I'll be quick here, and I'll echo some of the things that have already been said. I think one of the things, possibly biased because I am an academic researcher myself, but I do think that one of the main things that we can do, especially with talented people like this and dedicated organizations, is really kind of figure out what exactly the impact is of a lot of these things. I know we have guesses, and we are getting better at assessing, you know, where things are focusing, like Tessa says, around elections and around conflict, and we're getting a better idea of where it's coming from, what platforms are spreading it. But we still don't have, you know, an exceptional sense of knowledge about how it actually influences people's minds. How does it jump from online to affecting personal behavior in the real world? And I think a lot of effort can come from collaborations, not just within Africa, but also reaching out to groups like the Center for an Informed Public, like groups in Europe that have possibly, slightly different view of things, to collaborate and to, give our sense, but also to promote the voices of Africans from the continent who can bring in local knowledge, and to speak out to the platforms and, hopefully make them realize that they can't just have English language fact checkers. They need to have local people doing these fact checking on the websites. They need to be able, if they're going to expand, into these countries, they need to be able to invest the resources necessary to make it, safe and equitable for all people wherever these platforms are. And so that would be my final word. Thank you all again, and it's been a great panel.
All right, thank you so much. I'd like to thank everyone of you who either listened in or participated. Special mention and thanks to our panelists. That is, we have Simone Tuosi, we have Rosemary Ajayi, Tessa Knight, we also have Abel Wabella and Morgan Wack. Thank you so much for your very insightful conversations and also insights towards disinformation pathways and its effects. Of course, a special thanks to CPES as well for bringing us together. We, I think Rosemary said earlier, it's a collaborative effort to try and counter misinformation and disinformation, especially from a continent's perspective. And also one thing I've learned today is that as a journalist, I need to package disinformation and misinformation in a sexy way that our audiences will also be able to listen. Have a lovely day. Remember, this is not the only session. Of course, CIPESA has other sessions lined up for you. Just have a look at what is of interest to you on their website and get to participate. Goodbye for now.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.